This video is about the Canon EOS M 55-200 lens with image stabilization. When I moved to an EOS M system, I was very happy with the first three lenses, the 22mm, 18-55 and 11-22. The problem was that my maximum focal length was 55mm and I really wanted something a bit longer. I wanted a telephoto zoom. I already owned the EF 70-200 f4L IS, which I can use on the EOS M with the adapter. But the whole purpose of moving to EOS M was because I wanted a smaller light kit. And it's just pointless if you do that and then continue using big EF lenses. The 55-200 was cheaper than my other lenses, and the construction quality isn't quite as good. Whereas these ones have a metal lens mount, this one has a plastic lens mount. And because of that, and because of the fact it was very cheap, it was a lens that I was determined not to like. And the first images I took with it reinforced that perception that it wasn't a good lens, and for a long time I didn't like it. However, I was making a big mistake, a very fundamental mistake. And if you don't make that mistake, it's actually a very good lens. It can deliver good image quality, and for the money it's actually very good value. So in this video I'm going to take a bit of a close look at the lens, then I'm going to show you some sample images, and I'm going to tell you the one thing you must not do with this lens if you want to get the best possible image quality. The lens has image stabilization, which actually works very well. I'll be taking a close look at that later in the video. The focal length range is 55-200, which is equivalent to 88-320 on a full frame camera when you take into consideration the 1.6 crop factor. As you zoom, the lens extends. The shortest length is 87mm. And the longest is 132. The maximum diameter is 61mm and the filter size is 52mm. The weight is only 260 grams, which is roughly a third of the weight of this lens, which is a big advantage. The disadvantage is with the aperture. With the 70-200, it keeps the same aperture throughout the focal length range, but that doesn't happen with the 55-20. At the wide end, 55, you get a max aperture of f4.5 and a minimum aperture of f22. At the long end, that changes to f6.3, which is very slow, to f32. And that maximum aperture of f6.3 when you're using it at 200mm is probably the biggest disadvantage with this lens. You get a maximum aperture of f4.5 from 55 until around 62, and then from 63 to 99 it's f5. From 100 to 163, f5.6, and then 164 to 200, it's f6.3. Inside the lens are 17 lens elements in 11 groups, and there are 7 diaphragm blades. With a maximum aperture of f6.3, the bokeh's never going to be great, but it's okay. And like other EFM lenses, this one uses a stepper motor for autofocus. Stepper motors aren't quite as fast and snappy as ultrasonic motors, but they're supposed to be quieter and thus better for video, and the speed is not blazingly fast, but it's sufficient. As I said before, this lens actually has very good image stabilization, and this is very important with mirrorless cameras that don't have a viewfinder. If you have a viewfinder, you can hold the camera up to your eye and brace yourself and get quite steady. But when you're holding the camera at arm's length to view the composition on the display, it exacerbates any camera shake. In these photos, taken at a focal length of 200mm, I've set the shutter speed at 1/15 of a second and taken 2 shots of the same subject with the IS on and the IS off, and you can see the difference, and it really is a noticeable difference. Now for the big mistake I was making with this lens. I do use my camera in shutter speed priority mode, aperture priority, or even manual sometimes. For example, if I'm doing a panning shot and I want to create some motion blur in the background, I use a very slow shutter speed. Or if I'm taking a photo of a waterfall and I want to make the water look soft, I'll use a slow shutter speed. Or aperture priority if I want to do something with depth of field. However, most of the time I don't. I normally have the camera just set to the P mode and use auto ISO, and I find that the camera does a really good job. And when I've got the camera set this way, I don't have to worry about exposure. I can just focus on getting the shot and the composition. So I've got into a habit of just leaving everything on a sort of automatic mode. However, that's something you just can't do with the EOS M 55-200. The camera knows it's a long lens, so to prevent camera shake, it will try to set a very high shutter speed. Now with a maximum aperture of f6.3, the only way it can do that is to crank up the ISO to a really high setting. And what you end up with is like a soft image. And it's not because of the lens's optics, it's because the ISO is so high. And the critical level seems to be about 800. If the ISO is 800 or below, the image is quite good. If the ISO is above 800, the images start to look very soft. So the critical thing is not to use the auto ISO setting on the camera. Set the ISO to 100, check the shutter speed, and make sure it's fast enough to prevent camera shake and to stop the action. If it's not, increase the ISO to 200, 400, go up to 800, but don't go beyond that. As you saw with my previous examples, the IS system on this lens is actually very good, and you don't need very high shutter speeds to get good images. You can go right down to a 1/15 of a second. And by using slower shutter speeds, you'll be using a lower ISO and you'll get much better images. So just don't use the auto ISO feature. One of the things I like about telephoto zoom lenses is the difference in perspective that you get. And here are a few shots just to show you the difference in perspective between 55mm and 200mm. They're also good for taking photos of subjects that normally you couldn't get close to. They're also good for street photography and candid portraits. I always think the best portraits are those taken when the subject doesn't know that a photo is being taken. Here are a few more images taken with the Canon EOS M 55-200. I've included the exposure information with each image, and you'll probably notice that the images that look a bit soft have got very high ISO levels, as I described earlier, and the sharper images have a lower ISO setting. I'll just finish you a quick summary, and I picked up a saying about 25 years ago that I still use today. You can have anything, but you can't have everything. Ideally, I'd like to have the best quality, fastest lenses on me all the time, but that means carrying around heavy kit. I live in a very hot, humid country, and many years ago I got fed up carrying around heavy DSLR gear. That's why I moved to EOS M, and it became completely impractical once kids arrived. So when I'm travelling with my family these days, I just use a small camera bag, and I have a waistband with 3 small lens pouches. Now, this lens won't fit, but this one will. So the EOS M camera and the EF-M lenses are my preferred kit for travelling. And because of the problem I described earlier, this isn't a lens that I would have recommended initially, but once I got the hang of using it, it's a lens that I quite like now. So I would recommend one now, especially as they're not very expensive. So I hope that was useful. If it has been, please subscribe, and I'll try and get some more videos done fairly soon.